You understand why we have to do this, right? I stared at Maris from HR, her face a perfect mask of corporate concern. Behind her, my direct supervisor, Royce, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, not quite meeting my eyes. We've received several complaints about your behavior, Maris continued, sliding a manila folder across the conference table. Given the serious nature of these allegations, we're putting you on paid administrative leave effective immediately while we conduct a thorough investigation. My throat tightened as I opened the folder. Anonymous statements claiming I was hostile, intimidating, and creating a toxic environment. Incidents I had no memory of, conversations that never happened, accusations without dates or specifics. This is absurd, I whispered, flipping through page after page of lies. Who's saying these things? I deserve to know my accusers. Royce finally spoke up. Abigail, this is standard protocol. The complainants requested anonymity out of fear of retaliation. Fear? From me? The woman who brought homemade cookies every Friday? Who stayed late helping colleagues with their technical issues without complaint? During this period, Maris continued, her voice dripping with rehearsed sympathy, you are not to contact anyone from the office or access any company systems. Your credentials have already been suspended. We'll need your keycard before you leave. The room seemed to tilt slightly. 8 years. I'd been with the company for 8 years, built their entire network infrastructure, knew every server and database intimately. And now I was being exiled based on nameless accusations. How long will this take? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. These investigations are thorough, Maris said with a thin smile. Could be weeks, possibly months. We'll be in touch. Royce stepped forward with a small cardboard box. We've already collected your personal items from your desk. I looked at the pathetic box. 8 years reduced to a coffee mug, a small plant, and a framed photo of my cat. They'd planned this. They'd gone through my things while I sat in morning meetings, completely unaware my professional life was about to implode. We'll need you to sign this acknowledgement. Maris pushed another document forward, and we'll escort you out of the building. I signed without reading it. The numbness was setting in, a protective fog rolling over my mind as security appeared at the door, waiting to walk me out like a criminal. As I stood, clutching that sad little box to my chest, Royce finally looked me in the eye. Just cooperate with the process, Abby. It's easier that way. That's when I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a calculated attack. They marched me through the office, past the stunned faces of colleagues I'd worked alongside for years. No one said a word. No one dared. By the time the security guard took my keycard and watched me walk to my car, the shock was fading, replaced by something hot and clear and dangerous. They thought they were isolating me. They thought wrong. I'm Abigail, 36 years old, and until that day, I was the senior IT systems administrator at a well-known financial services firm in Boston. The quiet one. The reliable one. The one who knew all the passwords but never made waves. Who fixed problems without needing credit. Who watched and listened and understood the entire digital ecosystem because that was my job. Before I go any further with this story, could you please take a few seconds to tell me in the comments where you're watching from? I'm still amazed how far this has spread, and I want to know exactly where my story has reached. Maybe it'll help someone else in a similar situation. That first night after being put on leave was the worst. I sat in my apartment, cycling between tears, panic attacks, and frantic searches through my personal emails for any hint of what might have triggered this. Had I accidentally offended someone powerful? Was I being pushed out to make room for someone else? Was this about the system upgrade I'd questioned last month? By morning, the fog had cleared. Something Royce said kept replaying in my head. Your credentials have already been suspended. But here's the thing about being a systems administrator for 8 years. You create backdoors. Not for anything nefarious, just efficiency. Emergency access points for when systems inevitably crash at 3 a.m. Administrative channels that bypass normal authentication for maintenance. And crucially, you document everything, somewhere secure. In my case, that somewhere was an encrypted partition on my personal laptop. Every password, every access code, every network configuration for nearly a decade, including the root admin credentials that, Technically, I should have changed or reported when I set up a more secure system 3 years ago. I'd always meant to close that particular back door, just never got around to it. Now, it might be my only chance to understand what was happening. I spent that first day on leave just watching and waiting. No calls from HR, no emails from colleagues, complete radio silence, as if I'd never existed. By evening, the hurt had hardened into something else: determination. At exactly 11:34 p.m., when network traffic would be minimal, I opened my laptop and tried the old root credentials. They worked. I was in. For anyone non-technical watching this, what I did next wasn't especially sophisticated. I didn't hack anything. I simply used the administrator access. I'd always had access they thought they'd revoked but hadn't fully understood to look at what they were saying about me. First stop, HR's secure drive, where employee investigations were documented. I found my file easily enough. Abigail, conduct investigation, created 4 weeks before they'd even spoken to me. 4 weeks. They'd been building this case for a month while smiling to my face every day. The complaints were all there, 7 in total, each more ridiculous than the last. Abigail glared at me threateningly during the budget meeting. She deliberately sabotaged my presentation by not fixing my computer in time. She makes comments about other employees' competence when she thinks no one is listening. But something felt off about these complaints. The language was too similar, the grievances too vague, and the timestamps. All 7 complaints had been filed within the same 48-hour period, despite allegedly occurring over several months. I dug deeper, accessing the email servers. Our company used a popular email platform with decent security I had personally configured. I searched for emails mentioning my name over the past 2 months. That's when I found the first smoking gun, an email from Royce to Maris, dated 3 weeks before my suspension. We need to accelerate the Abigail situation. The audit is coming up in Q3, and we need this resolved before then. The complaints should be sufficient groundwork. Push for a minimum 3-month investigation period. What situation? What did an audit have to do with me? I kept digging, pulling email after email, downloading everything to my secure drive. Around 3 a.m., I found something that made my blood run cold. An email chain between Royce, Maris, and someone named Victor from our finance department, discussing the vendor issue and coverage tracks. Abigail's access permissions would make her the perfect explanation if questions arise. Victor had written, "Admins are always the first suspects in financial irregularities. Nobody questions when they have access to everything." Financial irregularities? They were planning to blame me for something. But what? I switched tactics, moving to the financial systems. As IT admin, I had access there too. Access that should have been monitoring for security threats, not snooping through accounting records. But these weren't normal circumstances. It took hours of searching before I found it. A vendor I'd never heard of, SummitLink Technologies, had been billing our company monthly for network infrastructure support services for nearly 2 years. Services my team supposedly managed, yet I'd never seen these invoices before. Each payment was between $18,000 and $25,000, all approved by Royce, all coded to bypass normal vendor verification processes. I looked up SummitLink Technologies online. Their website was basic, generic, created with a template. Their listed address was a P.O. box. Their phone number went to voicemail. They had no reviews, no client testimonials, no social media presence. This was a shell company. Someone was embezzling money, and based on those emails, they were planning to frame me for it. I felt sick, physically ill as the reality sank in, but I also felt something else, a cold, clarifying anger. They hadn't put me on leave because of complaints. They'd manufactured complaints to get me out of the way while they covered their tracks. I kept digging. Every night, between midnight and 4 a.m., I slipped into the company's systems and gathered evidence. I found more vendors with suspicious patterns. I uncovered deleted emails that our backup systems had preserved. I downloaded financial records showing Royce had approved over $1.2 million in payments to SummitLink Technologies and 2 other questionable vendors over the past 2 years. On the fifth night of my investigation, I hit the jackpot. In Maris's personal drive, which she should have known better than to keep on the company network, I found a folder labeled Family Photos. Except it didn't contain photos. It contained spreadsheets tracking placement fees for new hires. As HR director, Maris worked with recruitment agencies to fill positions. These agencies typically charged 15 to 20% of a new hire's first-year salary. According to these spreadsheets, Maris had been reporting inflated fees to accounting while paying the actual agencies less, pocketing the difference. Over 3 years, she'd skimmed nearly $340,000 this way. But I still couldn't prove the connection between Maris's recruitment scam and Royce's vendor fraud. What had brought them together in this conspiracy against me? The answer came during week 2 of my leave, in the form of an email from Royce to Maris. V says we need to accelerate the contingency plan. Too many questions about last quarter's numbers. Once the audit starts, we won't be able to adjust the records without leaving traces. We need the Abigail situation wrapped up by end of month. I searched for V in their communications and confirmed it was Victor Westbrook, our financial controller, the person responsible for financial reporting accuracy. The same person who'd suggested I would make a perfect scapegoat. I pulled Victor's emails next and discovered the final piece of the puzzle. Victor had noticed the irregular vendor payments during a pre-audit review. Instead of reporting them, he'd approached Royce privately. But rather than exposing the fraud, they'd formed an alliance. Victor would help hide the transactions, and in exchange, Royce would ensure Victor received a substantial performance bonus. But something had gone wrong. An external auditor had flagged several transactions for review in the upcoming quarterly audit. They needed a fall guy, or in this case, a fall girl. Me. Their plan was elegant in its simplicity. Place me on leave for an extended period due to serious behavioral issues. Then gradually plant evidence suggesting I had created fake vendors and diverted funds using my administrative access. By the time the investigation concluded, they'd have manufactured enough evidence to fire me for cause and report me to the authorities for embezzlement. What they hadn't counted on was that I was still watching, still gathering evidence, still building my case. By the 3rd week of my administrative leave, I had assembled an exhaustive record of their crimes. Royce's embezzlement through fake vendors, including proof his brother was behind SummitLink Technologies, Maris's recruitment fee skimming scheme, and Victor's complicity in covering it all up. But collecting evidence wasn't enough. I needed to understand exactly how they planned to frame me. And for that, I needed to access their personal communications, something I had ethical qualms about, despite everything they'd done. Then came the email that pushed me over the edge. We need to plant the evidence on her home computer, Royce wrote to Victor. I know a guy who can handle it. Make it look like she's been transferring the money to offshore accounts. HR has her home address. We'll need to find a way to get access. They were planning to break into my home, to plant evidence on my personal computer, to destroy not just my career, but my entire life. That's when I realized playing by the rules wouldn't save me. They certainly weren't playing by any. I took a deep breath and crossed a line I'd never thought I would. I accessed their personal email accounts, not the company ones, but the Gmail and Hotmail accounts they'd referenced in their work communications. What I found there changed everything. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't just about covering up fraud. This was personal. In an email to his brother, the owner of the shell company, Royce had written, "Don't worry about Abigail. She's been a potential problem since she questioned that server upgrade last year, the one where we slipped in the extra $150,000 of equipment that never arrived. She's too observant for her own good, but she'll be gone soon and we can get someone more cooperative in her position." They'd been watching me, waiting for an opportunity. I hadn't done anything wrong. My only crime was being too competent at my job. And then I found the smoking gun, the thing that made my blood boil and my hands shake so badly I nearly knocked my coffee off the desk. A message from Maris to Royce. I've drafted the criminal complaint. Once we discover the evidence on her computer, we submit this to the police. With her history, they'll believe it immediately. My history? I had no history. My record was spotless. Attached to the email was a document, a fabricated employment history showing I'd been fired from 2 previous jobs for financial improprieties. They'd created an entire false background for me, one that would make any fraud allegations instantly credible to investigators. They weren't just trying to fire me, they were trying to send me to prison. That night, I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, could barely breathe through the panic and rage. They had all the power, all the resources, all the credibility. I was just one person, already painted as problematic, already isolated. But I had one thing they didn't: the truth, and a roadmap to every dark corner of their conspiracy. I stood at the kitchen sink at 3 a.m., splashing cold water on my face, when I realized what I needed to do. It wasn't enough to defend myself. It wasn't enough to simply expose them. I needed to destroy their plan so thoroughly, so completely, that they would never recover. I had 4 weeks of administrative leave behind me. They'd told me the investigation could take months. That meant I still had time. I went back to my laptop and opened a new document. At the top, I typed, "Evidence of financial fraud and conspiracy at company name." Then I began to outline exactly how I would turn their investigation against them, how I would become the hunter instead of the hunted. They thought they were so clever, so untouchable. They thought putting me on leave was isolating me, neutralizing me. What they didn't realize was they'd just given me all the time in the world to investigate them. And unlike their investigation, mine was going to be airtight. The next morning, I made a crucial decision. I needed help. Not just any help, professional help from someone who understood both the legal and technical aspects of what I was uncovering. I reached out to an old college friend, Naomi, who had become a corporate attorney specializing in whistleblower cases. "We need to meet somewhere private," I told her over the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can't risk being seen with you." We met at a small cafe, 2 towns over. I brought my laptop and an external drive containing everything I'd discovered. For 3 hours, I walked her through the evidence while she took detailed notes, her expression growing increasingly grim. "Abigail," she finally said, closing her notebook, "this is substantial and disturbing. But, and I need you to hear this, what you've been doing could be considered unauthorized access." "They're trying to frame me for embezzlement," I replied, my voice shaking. "They're planning to break into my home." She held up her hand. "I understand. I'm not judging you. I'm telling you that how we proceed from here needs to be completely above board. We need to transform what you've gathered into legally admissible evidence without compromising your position." Naomi outlined a strategy. First, I would need to document my original administrative access proof that I had legitimate reasons for having the credentials I'd used. Second, we needed to establish a clear timeline of the conspiracy. Third, we needed to find independent verification of the fraud that didn't rely solely on my access to their systems. "And Abigail," she added as we were leaving, "stop accessing their systems immediately. You have more than enough. Any more could jeopardize everything." I nodded, but I knew there was one more thing I needed to do. That night, I made my final unauthorized entry into the company systems. Not to gather more evidence of their crimes, I had plenty. No, I needed to understand exactly how they planned to plant evidence on my computer. In Royce's emails to his guy, someone named Derek with no last name provided, I found the details. They planned to break into my apartment the following weekend when, according to their surveillance, I typically visited my mother in Connecticut. Derek would install remote access software on my laptop, then use it to create a digital trail connecting me to the embezzled funds. I read the email exchange 3 times, my hands trembling with rage and fear. Then I carefully documented it, adding it to my evidence file before logging out of the company systems for the last time. Now I had a new problem. They were planning to break into my home in 4 days. I called Naomi again. "New development," I said, then explained the planned break-in. "This changes things," she said after a long pause. "We need to move faster than I thought, and we need to involve law enforcement." The next day, I filed a police report about the threatened break-in, carefully avoiding any mention of the larger conspiracy or how I'd obtained the information. I simply stated I had reason to believe my apartment would be targeted based on concerning communications I'd received. The officer took my report, but I could tell he wasn't particularly alarmed. Just another paranoid city dweller imagining threats. What the police wouldn't do, I would have to do myself. I purchased 2 small security cameras and installed them in my apartment, one facing my desk where my laptop would be, another covering the front door. I backed up everything from my computer, then wiped it completely and reinstalled the operating system. If they were going to plant evidence, they'd find nothing to work with. Then, contrary to my usual routine, I didn't go to my mother's that weekend. Instead, I parked down the street and waited, watching my apartment building through binoculars like some amateur private investigator. At 2:14 p.m. on Saturday, a utility van pulled up. A man in a cable company uniform emerged and entered my building. My heart pounded as I activated the camera app on my phone, connecting to the security cameras in my apartment. For 20 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Then my door opened. The cable guy, Derek, I presumed, entered, looking around cautiously before heading straight to my desk. He sat down, pulled out a USB drive, and began working on my laptop. I recorded everything. His frustrated attempts to access files on my freshly wiped computer. His phone call, "The computer's been reset, there's nothing here," followed by whoever was on the other end, clearly giving him new instructions. Him installing software from his USB drive. Him taking photos of my apartment. When he finally left, I waited another hour before returning home. I checked my laptop now, infected with whatever they'd installed, and the security cameras, which had captured everything. I copied the video files to a secure drive, then called Naomi. "I have him on video breaking in and tampering with my computer," I told her. "What now?" "Now," she said, "we go on offense." The next phase of our plan required patience. For 2 more weeks, I played the role of the anxious employee on administrative leave. I made predictable phone calls to HR asking for updates on the investigation. I sent appropriately concerned emails about my status. I even ran into Maris accidentally at a grocery store and maintained a perfectly distressed demeanor. Meanwhile, Naomi was building our case. She helped me organize the evidence into a comprehensive report, focusing on 3 main areas: the embezzlement scheme involving Royce and the fake vendors, Maris's recruitment fee fraud, and the conspiracy to frame me for their crimes. We also took a calculated risk. Naomi reached out to a former colleague who now worked for the State Financial Crimes Division, presenting a hypothetical scenario matching what we'd uncovered. His response confirmed what we suspected. This was a serious case of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted framing that would interest multiple agencies. By week 6 of my administrative leave, our counter-investigation was complete. We had documented evidence of over $1.2 million embezzled through fake vendor schemes, approximately $340,000 skimmed from recruitment fees, dozens of communications proving the conspiracy, video evidence of the attempted break-in and computer tampering, a clear timeline showing how they'd manufactured complaints against me to remove me from the office. The final piece came when Naomi helped me identify Royce's brother as the owner of Summit Link Technologies through public records. Jonathan Harlow had changed his last name years ago, but the connection was still traceable through property records and business filings. We were ready. "They'll be contacting you soon," Naomi predicted. "It's been almost 2 months. Their timeline shows they wanted this wrapped up before the quarterly audit. When they call you in, that's when we move." She was right. Exactly 7 weeks after putting me on leave, Maris called. "Abigail, we need you to come in tomorrow at 9 a.m. to discuss the findings of our investigation," she said, her voice professionally neutral. "Please come to the main conference room." "Of course," I replied, matching her tone. "I'll be there." That night, I barely slept. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would remain calm, how I would reveal nothing until the perfect moment. By morning, I was running on adrenaline and 3 cups of coffee. I dressed carefully, a conservative gray suit, minimal makeup, hair pulled back, professional, serious. I wanted to look exactly like what I was, a competent IT administrator who had been wrongly accused. Naomi met me in the parking lot of the office building. "Remember the plan," she said, handing me a sealed envelope. "Let them speak first. Let them make their accusations. Don't interrupt. Don't get emotional. When they're finished, then you respond." I nodded, clutching my laptop bag with the evidence files securely inside. "And Abigail," she added, squeezing my arm, "you've got this." The main conference room was set up like a tribunal. On one side of the long table sat Maris, Royce, Victor, and a man I didn't recognize who Maris introduced as Jeffrey Palmer from legal. On the other side, a single chair waited for me. "Thank you for coming in, Abigail." Maris began, her voice falsely sympathetic. "This has been a thorough investigation into the complaints against you, and I'm afraid the findings are serious." She slid a document across the table, my termination notice already prepared. "We've documented a pattern of hostile behavior, intimidation of colleagues, and inappropriate comments that violate our code of conduct," she continued. "Additionally, during our investigation, we discovered some financial irregularities that appear to involve your administrative access credentials." Victor leaned forward, taking over the narrative. "Several unauthorized vendor payments were processed using system access that traces back to your credentials. We've identified transfers totaling over $900,000 to entities that provided no actual services to the company." Royce couldn't quite meet my eyes as he added, "Given the severity of these findings, we're terminating your employment effective immediately. Mr. Palmer here will explain the potential legal ramifications." The lawyer cleared his throat. "The company is prepared to pursue criminal charges for the financial improprieties unless you agree to cooperate fully, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and help us understand exactly where the money went." They sat back, a unified front of corporate authority, watching for my reaction, expecting tears, denial, panic. Instead, I smiled. "Before I respond to these allegations," I said calmly, "I'd like to introduce my attorney, Naomi Chen, who is waiting outside. Would you mind if she joins us?" Their expressions flickered surprise, then concern. This wasn't in their script. "That won't be necessary for this meeting," Jeffrey Palmer said quickly. "You can consult with an attorney after." "I insist," I interrupted, already standing. "In fact, I think you'll want to hear what she has to say." Before they could object further, I opened the conference room door and signaled to Naomi. She entered, professional and poised, setting her briefcase on the table. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Naomi Chen, representing Abigail. Before we proceed, I'd like to inform you that we have filed reports with the State Financial Crimes Task Force, the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division, and the Department of Labor regarding the conspiracy to frame Miss Abigail for embezzlement committed by Mr. Harlow, Ms. Peterson, and Mr. Westbrook." The blood drained from Victor's face. Royce gripped the edge of the table. Maris's professional mask slipped for the first time, revealing naked panic beneath. "This is absurd," Jeffrey Palmer sputtered. "What conspiracy? What evidence could you possibly—" I opened my laptop and turned it to face them. "Evidence like this email chain where you discuss creating fake vendors to embezzle company funds. Or perhaps this spreadsheet where Maris tracks her recruitment fee skimming? Or maybe the video of your associate breaking into my apartment to plant evidence on my computer last month?" For a moment, the only sound in the room was Royce's ragged breathing. "You can't have those emails," Maris whispered. "Those are on secure servers." "Servers I designed, implemented, and maintained for 8 years," I replied evenly. "Servers you never fully understood." Naomi took over, her voice cool and professional. "We have documented evidence of fraud exceeding $1.5 million, conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to obstruct justice, breaking and entering, and attempted framing of an innocent employee. We've prepared copies for the board of directors, who I believe are gathering for their quarterly meeting down the hall right now." Jeffrey Palmer stood abruptly. "This meeting is over. You are making serious allegations without—" "Sit down, Jeffrey," I said, surprising myself with my commanding tone. "You haven't even seen the best part yet." I opened another file on my laptop, The recorded conversation between Royce and his brother discussing how they'd divided the embezzled funds and their plans to leave the country if things went south. As the audio played, Royce put his head in his hands. "Here's what's going to happen," I said when the recording finished. "In exactly 15 minutes, representatives from the State Financial Crimes Task Force will arrive with warrants. Before they do, I'm giving you one chance to do the right thing. Call an emergency board meeting, confess everything, and resign." "Why would we do that?" Victor asked, his voice a terrified whisper. "Because if the authorities make these arrests, this becomes front-page news," Naomi explained. "Every client will know. Every investor will know. The company might not survive. But if you come clean voluntarily," she shrugged, "there's a chance to contain the damage." I watched them exchange glances, calculating their options, realizing they had none. 15 minutes, I reminded them, standing up. "I'll be in the lobby." Naomi and I left them there, shell-shocked and crumbling. In the elevator down, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. "That went even better than expected," Naomi said with a small smile. "It's not over yet," I replied. But it almost was. Within 10 minutes, Royce had called an emergency board meeting. Within an hour, all three had resigned. By afternoon, the board had issued statements about financial irregularities discovered by our diligent IT staff and full cooperation with authorities. I watched it all unfold from the lobby, where I gave my statement to the financial crimes investigators who arrived exactly when Naomi had said they would. They'd been waiting nearby all morning, prepared for either outcome. The fallout was swift and comprehensive. Royce, Maris, and Victor were arrested 2 days later. The investigation uncovered even more fraud than I had found. Royce's brother attempted to flee the country but was stopped at the airport. The company's stock took a hit, but survived the scandal by emphasizing their cooperation and the fact that the fraud had been uncovered internally. As for me, the board offered me my job back with a substantial raise and a new title, Chief Information Security Officer. I declined. Instead, I negotiated a settlement for wrongful termination and hostile work environment that included full back pay, a glowing recommendation, and enough money to take 6 months off to decompress. 3 months after my administrative leave began, I walked out of that building for the last time, free and vindicated. The criminal cases took longer to resolve. Royce and his brother both pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testimony against the others. Maris fought the charges but was eventually convicted of fraud and conspiracy. Victor turned state's evidence early and received the lightest sentence. Derek, the break-in specialist, gave up his employers immediately and got probation. I testified at 2 of the trials, looking each of them in the eye, as I described how they'd tried to destroy me simply because I was too observant, too competent at my job. The court transcripts show that Royce never once looked back at me while I testified. Maris stared at me the entire time, her eyes full of cold hatred until the very end. Sometimes people ask if I regret how things turned out, if I wish I'd just found another job and moved on instead of fighting back. The answer is always no. What they tried to do wasn't just unfair, it was criminal. They would have stolen years of my life, destroyed my reputation, possibly sent me to prison, all to cover up their own crimes. They thought putting me on administrative leave was isolating me, neutralizing me. Instead, they gave me the time, space, and motivation to dismantle their entire operation. They thought I was alone and powerless. They were wrong. 6 months after it all ended, I started my own cybersecurity consulting firm specializing in financial fraud prevention. My first client? The company that replaced the board members who had allowed the fraud to happen on their watch. There's a certain poetry in that, I think. I still have the box of personal items they gave me that day. The sad little plant, now thriving. The coffee mug. The picture of my cat. I keep them on a shelf in my new office as a reminder. When someone tries to make you small, sometimes the most powerful response is to show them exactly how big you can be. If you're watching this and you're in a situation where people with power are trying to crush you, remember my story. Document everything. Find allies. Know your value. And never, ever underestimate the strength that comes from having nothing left to lose. Oh, and one more thing. If you found this story helpful or inspiring, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Each time you share these stories, you help someone else who might be facing their own workplace nightmare. Leave a comment letting me know if you've ever experienced something similar, or if you have questions about protecting yourself in these situations. I read every comment, and your experiences matter to me. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just exposing the truth, it's making sure others know how to protect themselves too.